This video is brought to you by Arma, who provides top quality supplements to athletes of all kinds. Riders like Nick Way, Chad Reed, Jeremy McGrath use them for pre, during, and post-activity applications. Be sure to head to armasport.com and use the code RACERX. That's RACERX, no spaces, for 20% off your first order.
Lots of new announcements on 2021 motocross bikes. Jason Weigandt here with RacerX Films. Let's call up our bike guru, the Kris Keefer of Keefer Inc. Testing. And Kris may or may not be someone who had a big hand in the development of some of these new bikes. He can't talk too much about his test rider job, but he can talk about the new production machines and what he thinks and has felt with them so far. You can look up the Keefer Tested podcast, Keefer, for more in-depth reviews on these bikes. But for now, I rang him up real quick today where he was, of course, at a motocross track doing more testing. Our first topic, the all-new Honda CRF 450R for 2021. Well, the Honda, maybe you do know something about the bike, maybe you don't, but that's big news right now, a new Honda 450. What can you say about that bike?
So on my show, I did a recording about the bike. So
yeah.
It's out in the open. I'm pretty transparent. I've tested for Honda for the last 2-3 years, and I've had a fairly good amount of time on that bike already. So I've had some input on it, and for me, that's what I try to tell people on the podcast is it's a better Honda. So what we went for was less rigidity, still keep the precise cornering, but just have more overall power with trying to get more comfort out of the bike.
The head angle is 5 degrees steeper. To me, that's a massive change. Does it actually seem that way, or is when you massage it all together, does it not actually work like that?
So what I noticed with that was, even though the Honda has lost weight, it's only 244 pounds in 2021. That's with a full tank of fuel.
Okay.
But it feels, with that angle, the bike feels really light.
Oh, okay.
What I call the area one of the corner, which is that initial lean. That makes that bike feel really light and flickable.
Is the engine changes that I'm hearing, is this the excitement down low that you often talk about?
So for me, it's not as exciting as the 2020, but it's more connected to the rear wheel, which in return makes it easier to ride. And for me, it's more exciting to ride because I can actually freaking hold on to the thing.
Okay.
So that's the whole benefit of that, is now that power is spread out in a broader range, and without that gnarly hit of the 2020, it's easier to control in the corner. Okay,
so that's the pretty big news on the Honda. I'll get a few other things. So Yamaha's 250F now gets the changes that the 450F had last year. How significant did you find the changes to Yamaha's 450 when they changed it from 2019 to 2020? How different will this 250 probably be?
It's funny because when I rode the new Yamaha, or the updated Yamaha last year, I wasn't that impressed, and the Yamaha guys were all pissed off at me. They thought it was a huge difference. But after I rode it more than a couple days, I could see how, for me, it was just a little bit better front-end traction and more controllable. So just like the Honda, the Yamaha has a lot of power and needs more control.
Okay.
So it got that. So as you guys know, the 250F is the leader in torque as far as getting a heavier guy or a vet guy on that 250F. It's easy to ride. So now that they did those changes to the head and to the frame, I think they're going to get better cornering and even a broader mid to top end range, because that's what the Yamaha 250F lacked, was top end overhead, similar to the KTM. I think every manufacturer is trying to go that route, trying to get a better mid to top end over rev and try to keep some bottom end.
Yeah, okay, that's perfect transition, because Kawai's 250 is new. They had a new engine last year. Now the whole platform's different, but it does look like even the engine changes are designed for top end a bit on the Kawai. Is it about time finally that this 250 changed to the 450? Because I feel like the 450 has been well received, that chassis and whatnot. So this should be good for Kawai, I would think.
Yeah, Kawasaki, I always say that, has the best frame feeling out of any bike.
Wow.
If you go to a rough track, that frame, that chassis is the most stable. You can go fast in the bumps, and it still has adequate cornering. So now that you're adding that to the 250, I don't expect that to change. And now you have an electric start, you got a hydraulic clutch, and now you're going to have even more over rev, because as you know, you see these kids riding 250Fs, they just rev the crap out of them. So, so for me, that's like I said, I think everyone's trying to get a little bit more mid to top because that's where everyone seems to ride those 250Fs.
Just give me an update. The Honda 250 hasn't changed. They really shifted rapidly to that top end when they redesigned the 250 engine a couple years ago. But didn't they go too far? Like, isn't there a danger of going too far into that? We're focused on the high RPM.
Yeah, and I'll be the first one to admit it. I don't really like the Honda 250 because it doesn't have that torque.
Yeah.
But let's take, for instance, my kid. He's 125 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
He loves that bike because it's easy for him to ride.
Okay.
And he revs it a little bit. He's 14, right? So he's hyperactive. He wants to rev it. But for 2020, they did get a little bit of bottom end.
Okay.
But it has such a good mid to top end feel.
Mm-hmm.
And that chassis is so easy to corner and makes it fun to ride. So there's a lot of pluses besides the lack of torque. To me, the only really negative on a 250 Honda is the lack of torque. But if you seem to ride in the mid to top, it's a good bike.
Is that like a riding style change away? Like, can you just make yourself say, don't short shift this thing or clutch it more? Can you kind of adjust? Or is it like you kind of ride the way you ride and it's going to hurt?
Actually, it's more difficult to do on 250s versus the 450. You can really change your style and your riding technique with a 450. But, man, if you're an average dude, a blue-collar guy, and you just want to ride and you want a 250 because you don't want all that weight, but you're not good in the corner, you need torque.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to be dog paddling in the corner because you got nothing there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a balance, but out of all the 250s, I would say Honda lacks the most torque out of all of them.
I would wonder, and I know you wouldn't know this, if they shift the other direction with the next one, but I know you wouldn't know anything about that.
I don't know anything about anything.
Okay. The KTM and Huskies have already kind of been announced, so I already forget, like, there's not huge changes, I don't think. Just suspension settings?
Yeah, they still got the AER fork. The air fork is still intact with KTM and Husqvarna. And for me, it's not like a spring fork feel, but it is way better than it used to be. I remember riding an old Kawasaki that had a Showa SFF 3-chamber fork. That thing was a piece of trash.
Yep.
And now they changed some valving. They changed the piston design in the AER fork. So now that fork moves a little bit initially, gives the rider more front-end feel. So that is an improvement. And also, no one can beat a KTM or Husky on top end, man. Those things are fast. And if you can learn, like I said, you can learn to ride the mid to top, it'll reward you because I've been drag racing up 250s up Glen Helen, and my 450 can't catch it. So if you manage to ride it where it needs to be ridden, it's a good bike.
So even though we know like Yamaha's 250 is so fast, it has so much power, that's a lot of it is that is grunt. Like in an all-out drag race, KTM is good.
Yeah, so we said, we're going to go down a quarter-mile drag strip, right? KTM and Husqvarna would beat the other bike simply because the over-rev is much higher than the other bike. The Honda has a higher over-rev, but doesn't have that meat at the end of the power like a KTM or Husqvarna.
By the way, the Yamaha still is coil-sprung KYB fork. Is that still where it's at? Like, is that still like, man, that's really the suspension to have? I feel like that was the rep for so long.
Man, that still is the bar for every manufacturer. I remember when I was at Yamaha and I worked for the R&D department, the baseline for a bike was an '08 Honda 450.
Really?
And now everything has changed as far as suspension. KTM, Kawasaki, they'll test the Yamaha just to try to get as much plushness and comfort from the SSS KYB stuff. So old technology, still really good.
Okay, well, the reason I ask that is because, people kind of make the mistake if they look at racing and use that to guide their bike choices. Let's be honest, say like the YZ450F in Supercross, the results haven't been great. But now you're talking work suspension. And people are like, oh, that bike's heavy or it's big, and maybe that's why Barsha isn't winning races. But on these stock bikes, you could argue that the fork is maybe as important as any other thing, and Yamaha has a better fork.
Absolutely, and honestly, and I'll say it, and I've told the Yamaha guys this too, I think they end up screwing their bike up more because they're doing more stuff to it. And with that Yamaha, Travis Preston and those guys say, hey, let's try to work from stock and do bits and pieces because we don't want to go backwards. So for the vet guy on a Yamaha, it's the best bike. Look at Mathis, loves the bike.
Yeah.
Faster dudes always complain about, hey, the Yamaha, you know, when I push it, it does things unexpectedly, like it snaps back. So for the average guy, you know, 98% of us, that bike is great. Those 2%ers like Barsha and those guys, when they're pushing the limit, maybe that bike isn't the best, you know?
That's exactly the explanation I was looking for, how we have this weird thing where factory riders are saying they don't like it, average guys and shootouts are saying it's awesome. So there's actually a reason. That actually makes sense to have that.
Yeah, I mean, look at Suzuki, another perfect example. Everyone's shitting on Suzuki.
Yeah.
But we need that brand in our community. We need a brand that is a little bit of a lower cost point, you know, price point. And the bike's still good. The 250 has a lot of torque. I would say second in class behind the Yamaha for torque.
Wow.
And the Suzuki Arm 450 still corners the best out of everything right now. So there's still a lot of useful Suzukis out there that could be purchased. Just because JGR isn't setting the world on fire doesn't mean it's not a great bike.
Do you know anything about 2021 Suzukis? Are the only ones we haven't heard about yet? Anything?
No, actually, I just saw one of the test guys that used to test for him here at the track today.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I don't have a job anymore.
Oh.
And I go, well, they changing anything? And he's like, no. So I think 2021 will be the rollover from 2020.
Okay, so every fan who has said, dude, they just need, the bikes are too good, too expensive now, they just need to make lower price point, lower tech bikes. Everybody's got their chance to put their money where their mouth is now. That's what it's going to be.
Absolutely. And Honda's trying to do that. They're reproducing 2020 bikes to get a lower price point. But, I mean, for me, it's not worth it. It's $1,000 less.
Right.
Like, if I was in the market and going to go buy a new bike and it's only $1,000 difference to get a new bike, I'm still buying a new bike.
Yes, when everyone...
What about you? Weege, out of all the guys, how would you look at that?
Yeah, it's two-sided. $1,000 is, I agree with you, not a huge game changer, but I know for me, the bike's probably not going to make a difference. So I might do that. You got to get back to riding?
Yes, sir.
That was good info. Yeah.
I love it.